anytime I was thinking, people always have this engagement in this dialogue, opening it up. And it's sort of like, you can't think that way because then you're thinking an end goal. The process and this has to feel more organic than that.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. Today's episode takes us behind the scenes of director George C. Wolfe's new drama, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Based on August Wilson's Tony Award-winning play, the film captures the tensions and temperatures that rise over the course of an afternoon recording session in 1920s Chicago with the legendary mother of the blues, Ma Rainey. In addition to Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Mr. Wolfe's directorial credits include the feature films You're Not You and Nights in Rodin. He was nominated for the DGA's Movies for Television and Miniseries Award in 2017 for The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and won in that same category in 2005 for Lackawanna Blues. Mr. Wolfe spoke with director Bill Condon about filming Ma Rainey's Black Bottom in front of a virtual audience. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Welcome, everyone. I was thinking maybe there's so much to discuss in this brilliant movie that maybe a prism that we can talk about it through is just the art of adapting a play to the theater, to the movies, and the demands of this new medium. So just from the very beginning, all of the stuff, and I think it was wonderful to be able to watch the movie several times and just see how many brilliant moments of invention there are that are obviously not in the play, but clearly this starts with the first 5-minute chunk, with that brilliant opening shot where it feels like we're watching two kids that are being lynched, and no, they're not going toward tragedy, they're going toward joy. They're going to see Ma Rainey perform. And just one thing I thought when I saw it, was that with that scene and then the scene that follows in Chicago, you kind of set the terms right away by saying this is theater. It is ultimately, it's a play with language that's as expressive and beautiful as Shakespeare's. It does have a number of musical numbers in the form of speeches. And I think, as opposed to movies that have maybe shied away from the theatrical, nature of what they are, you're saying, relax, you're going to enjoy it, I'm going to lead you there. That's part of what I got out of that decision to start in such a theatrical way.
No, I mean, possibly. I mean, if that's what you received, if that's what you received, I was much more interested in redefining what our collective understanding is of the South. That was my thought process. Right. Because right. At one point in the script, Ma Rainey says to Irving, her manager, the line is something to the effect, I don't like it up here anywhere, talking about Chicago, so I can take my ass back down south. Now, our connotation of the South is Black people on their knees singing Go Down Moses and Jim Crow laws and statues of Confederate, soldiers and the oppressive nature of that. And that very much so was true, but also under the structure of segregation, Black people were able to create their own communities, their own support system. So I wanted to start with what we thought we knew. I wanted to start with two young Black men running, and there's cicadas in the trees, and we've seen that dynamic in a number of movies. So I wanted to start with that, and I wanted to engage us in what we thought we knew. And there's a sense of, and hopefully there's a sense of anxiety because we're hearing that and we're seeing them running and we're hearing the dogs bark. And then all of a sudden we realize that, as you pointed out, we're not running from something, we're running to something. And we're running to an event in which you see nothing but Black people, and you see at the center of this woman. In August's play, even though it's called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, there's like an hour's worth of material, brilliant language, in which these guys are just talking and telling stories. And I wanted to get rid of that. I probably, through the course of working with Ruben on the script, killed off probably about 40% of the actual play text. And I wanted to, and anything that didn't focus, solidify, enhance, and compound the power dynamic between Levy and Ma was in essence exercised from the script because I wanted to be very clear about that. And also I wanted to, so you're starting in apprehension and then you transition and then you're seeing this creature who has a congregation, if you will. So there's a theatricality, but it's a cultural theatricality. It's a preacher and her congregation. It's not a conventional audience separation. There is no separation between Ma and her audience. She is at one with it. And then just when we were starting to enjoy the phenomenon of the performance and relaxing into that, then I have a series of images of if you will, tableaus, which are animated, which are about the journey of from the South to the North of all these Black people. And then we end up in a theater in Chicago where it's very different from the theater in the South, where it's Ma and her audience. Because of modernity, because of electricity, you can't see that audience. So there's a disembodiment between her and her audience. But also what you're really watching is, hopefully by the end of that sequence at the Grand Theater, you know there's a young man, you don't know his name, who is brash. You know, he steals stage from Ma. You know she doesn't like it. You see him flirting with this girl. We don't know quite who the girl is. Yeah. And you see the other people in the band disapproving, so that before one piece of dialogue is actually heard, hopefully the audience's journey from the South to the North with Ma, and you understand the power dynamics that are in place. So it was using performance milieus, but not in the sense of a play, but using it so as to play around with establishing this degree of intimacy between Ma and her congregation and audience. Because once we come to Chicago, it's going to be, for lack of better words, the contamination of that. Whereas you're taking that rawness of performance and you're putting it inside a machine so that therefore it can be mass produced. So it's about the commodification of a culture. So you are seeing the rawness of the culture first, and then you're going to be watching the journey, whereas that culture is ultimately going to be disregarded so we can come up with a product. So that was sort of more my thinking about that opening, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. And I talked to your brilliant DP, Tobias, who said that you wouldn't even allow anybody to bring in extras in that theater because you wanted to make sure that there was no possibility of her connecting to the audience.
Exactly. Because it's, because because that audience is there, and that audience is sort of like the people in the South, but they've already been urbanized. So she's on her way out. And they're also by that time in Chicago, Jelly Roll Morton was a huge hit. Louis Armstrong was a huge hit. So the era of the woman blues singer as the star is on its way out. And we're getting ready to enter into the era of the band conductor as the star. It's, Duke Ellington and his orchestra. In Levy's mind, Levy Green and his orchestra. And one of the things that was really interesting that Viola and I talked about very early on is that she's facing, in many respects, the end of her career, which is part of the reason why I think she's so unreceptive to what Levy has to offer, aside from the fact he's brash and he's sleeping with his boss's daughter, which is never a good thing. But is that the film is set in 1927. Ma never recorded again after 1928. She never ventured north. One of the things that's also really very, and Bessie Smith, who was her lover and who she taught, has usurped her, has sort of, rendered her obscure. And one of the things that I found out in post, when I was putting together this in credit moment, there are literally a total of 7 photographs of Ma Rainey, period.
Unbelievable.
So, and this woman who was so crucial to the evolution, if you didn't have the blues, you wouldn't have rock and roll. The blues is the root of everything. She was, were it not for the corrupting of of stealing of our songs and the records that we have, she would be rendered totally invisible. So it's just that interesting dynamic that I wanted to go from the purest form of performance, i.e., performer and congregation, to the most contaminated in my, and a certain level, I think August's thought process was, which is, by virtue of her recording, she ceases to have power.
Right.
But thank God she was recorded, because otherwise, where would she be in terms of us having a relationship with what was so brilliant and extraordinary about her?
Yeah. Then we come to the door. The door in the play is, it mentions one of the first things that Cutler and Levy argue. Levy and Toledo argue about. He thinks why does everything have to change? That door wasn't here. Of course it was here. And that's it.
Yeah.
But can you tell us about that decision to make the door such a focal point in staging and in everything, having in Chadwick's performance?
Well, it's very interesting because I was going, anytime I was thinking, people always have this engage you in this dialogue, opening it up, and it's sort of like you can't think that way, because then you're thinking an end goal. The process and this has to feel more organic than that. And so I was just going, why is Levy talking about that door? Why are we having a conversation about that door? And I was just going, what's on the other side of that door? What's on the other side of the door? And I just, by asking that question, it came to me one day that he needs to break through that door at his most vulnerable and most desperate, because for him, I think people are perpetually, I think it's one of the wonderful things about being a human being, and I think it's one of the incredibly foolish things about being a human being, is that we are perpetually, a large percentage of us are perpetually holding out for a happy ending. It's the thing that allows us to wake up in the morning and feel empowered. Today, every single extraordinary thing that can and should happen is going to happen today. Now, what ends up happening to Levy is every single thing that horrible could happen ends up happening to him in one day. He gets fired, and then shortly thereafter, the promise of him having a recording session is gone. He doesn't end up with the girl, and so he's at a loss. And after that moment when he gets fired, there's just rage and insecurity and fear going on inside of him. And being a young man, even though he's 32, he feels very much so like he's in his 20s. For me, he needs to release what's going on inside of him. And so I'm going to leave. No, that. I'm going to stay. No, that. I'm going to make this place cool. No, that. I'm going to relax. No, I'm not. What that door? And so that therefore, when he breaks through that door, and it's interesting because at one point my production designer did a brilliant job. Came up with this idea of some hook hanging up there. I went, no. And people have kept on throwing ideas at me. I've said, no. He sees a piece of that sky, but he is surrounded by walls. And it becomes for me, ultimately, the American equation of what has been promised to Black people since the dawn of this country. If you transform yourself, if you surrender that which idiosyncratically about your culture, if you believe in this God, if you march, if you surrender, if you are angry, if you do a whole series of things, one day you will, on the other side of that, on the other side of the obstacle is infinite possibility. And in that moment, Levy is counting on that. It's not conscious, but it's built into his subliminal existence. On the other side of that door is America is going to come through on the deal it's been promising Black people since the very beginning. And when he breaks through and he finds just an enclosure that's smaller than the one that he's operating from, it's the end of in many respects of hope and faith and possibility. and that sense of buoyancy that I spoke to earlier about a potential of a happy ending. It shatters it shatters that wonderful childlike thing that we all have inside of ourselves, which is the possibility of the next moment.
Well, the thing that's miraculous is that you described that, and it's all there. That's something you feel. I felt when I watched it. And I felt, a play exists in its time, a movie exists in its time, but then you get to that moment, and everything that resonates in the play and that's universal and still applies, and everything that applies certainly to recent events, just hits you with such incredible force. So bravo for that. It really, it's just an amazing way. Again, an example of something where you're interpreting something else and then turning it into something that's just so essential and beautifully.
Well, because it's one of the wonderful things about film. It's one of the wonderful things about film. I mean, I love doing theater, but there's this the one thing I love about film is every single detail matters.
Yes.
Every single detail either enhances the story or distracts from the story. The perfection of Faye Dunaway's eyebrows in Chinatown is there as a camouflage for the corruptness that is intrinsic to the family that she is formed. Those eyebrows must be flawlessly perfect to conceal all the corruption that is going on inside. And every single detail matters, and you get to obsess in an insane, crazy way as a director about every single detail. And anybody who worked on this film will tell you that's what I did. But camouflaging it and making it appear like it's discovery. Robin Wagner, the set designer, has this brilliant phrase. He says, collaboration is a word that directors invented to make everybody feel good about obeying them. And so that's one of the things that that every single detail matters. And so my brain, which works like that and is obsessed in that way, it gets to play with that. But the other thing is that there can be these incredibly large visual gestures that can encapsulate all this emotion. And that's what breaking through that door is. It encapsulates Levy's desperation for a possibility when he desperately needs it. And the moment is not articulated through language, and the language in this film is incredibly gorgeous and amazing and powerful, and they're like blues arias. But it's a visual moment that it has embedded in it as you said, all the language, all the hopes, all the possibilities of that character in that moment. And film can do that in a thrilling way.
I heard you, for example, in the big scenes downstairs, that you would show up easily an hour early every morning, sort of ask for the room alone, would crouch for ungodly periods of times in different places, and had this idea that it was a boxing match, that it was a boxing ring. And I'm just curious about that, and also about blocking, and obviously that's something that's so much a part of theater, but blocking and then blocking for camera, and how that worked for you.
Well, it's going back. We had 2 weeks of rehearsal, which was crucial. And which we played around. I had them mock up the room. Very early on, when I was talking with the production designer about the room, it was crafted in an oblong. It was crafted as a rectangle, and I remember at one point Tobias and Mark were there, and I said, "No, bring in the column, bring in the column, bring in the column." And I saw them looking at each other and sort of rolling their eyes like, he is trying to make our life hell. And so I moved them in until it was a boxing ring, because to my mind, particularly in that first 15 minutes of the film, where I wanted to come up with a conceptual idea which the actors could grab onto, so that therefore I could play around with crafting the rhythms in a very taut way. And to me, it was a series of boxing rounds that these four guys engage in. And we spent a lot of time in that 2-week rehearsal period discussing when you are punching, when you got hit, when you got clobbered, when do you retreat to your corner, when do you not? And so it was, so to me, it was a linguistic raging bull, if you will. Yeah. It was giving, so that therefore the language has the potency to injure, to take command, to declare a victory, to force you to retreat. And so all of those dynamics were playing, and I talked to the actors about them, so that therefore there was no like lazy rhythms going on. It was a chance to keep on winning, to gaining points. And so just the idea of that, and then that ended up forming, how all of those scenes were done, who's retreating, who's charging at. There are moments where Cutler hurls something at Levy, and the other guys are laughing, and he retreats over to a column, and then when Irving comes in and says we're going to do Levy's version, he comes charging back, going ooh at him. It's all done with a sense of play, but it is, I just won, you lost. No, now I'm winning. And so that's how I staged it. And I would every day before I would sit in those spaces and figure out what the hell. I sort of knew what I was doing, but then I would make it more tangible. And then I'd have the actors come over, and it would just be me, the actors and me in the room playing. And then once they felt comfortable in what I had crafted, then I invited Tobias and the first AD and the script supervisor in, and then after that, everybody else. But I wanted to start with allowing the actors to feel comfortable, so that when we started filming, they weren't searching for it. They had formulated from the 2 weeks before and from that morning a basis of command, so that therefore, when I pushed them in a certain direction, rhythmically or blocking wise, they could adjust to it because they already had an emotional and a linguistic command. So that was what was going on.
And it does lead to, rhythm. I mean, it does add a certain speed to everything, which is that sports metaphor does make it all. Everything is so kinetically charged, And
it's also because one of the things that I think, aside from the opening sequence and the end sequence, it's one day, which is incredibly wonderful. It's a wonderful filmic device. Everything's going to happen in one day. Yeah. And also, in the play, it takes place in the winter. And I made a decision. I just said, no, it has to take place in summer because urban landscapes are brutal in the summer. Right. The heat doesn't bounce. The heat doesn't go inside the earth. The heat bounces off the concrete and then into your body. And so that therefore it was another way to explain that why the stakes are so charged, because maybe on a cooler day, more rational thoughts would emerge. But because of the heat and because of the stakes and having only one day, it produces this pressure cooker of thinking and feeling and response. So as a result of it, it's happening almost faster than the characters know what's happening to them.
When it comes to the arias, to the speeches, obviously they're all shot in very, very different ways. But one thing I was really struck by going back to the play was that Levy's amazing speech about his mother and father ends Act 1, followed by a little snippet of music. And you and Ruben Santiago Hudson, I'm sure, together, but I want to talk about how you both decided on this and then did it. You then followed it immediately by a monologue of Toledo's that had preceded it in the play. Almost so making this emotional connection between these two characters, that it was what Levy had revealed prompted Toledo to share this story. So then which only adds to the tragedy of what happens at the end.
Exactly.
But the extraordinary thing is that when you cut from Toledo playing piano and then are on his face, the room has almost all gone away. I mean, the light is dark. It is theatrical, or it is, he's somewhere else now. It's entirely different from what we just saw. which was really, a Levy's speech, but everyone's reaction, especially Toledo's. And now there is this story that then in one of the most stylized things in the movie is intercut with these not still frames, but these staged frames of, people in Chicago who are sort of, waiting for the great thing to happen, right?
Yeah.
And reminded me weirdly of shots from James Whale's Showboat, a show that opened in 1927, but these just beautiful images of just packed with emotion, even though they were so still. So how did that all come about? Because that was amazing.
Well, because anytime, one of the things that was very interesting to me is that all of those stories, that they tell, they're all Black men and they're all from the South. So even though if Cutler is telling the story about Reverend Gates, that's very specific to him, but they each know that story from somebody in their family or somebody from their town. So that a Levy telling the story about his parents, it's very specifically his stories, and the details are very specifically his story. But they find themselves each inside of it, and the brutality of what he experienced at such a young age, to me, deeply affects all of them. But Toledo being the oldest, he's also, to my mind, the philosopher, the intellectual, if you will, of the bunch. And so it's left him in a state. And so he starts talking and he's working something out with himself. It's interesting that you notice, because I had the room completely stripped. I had all the details of that's on the walls that that are there for the rest of the film. I just wanted them all to go away, so that therefore you were witnessing him formulating his thoughts. And I wanted it to start off like it's some sort of casual, sort of emotional sorbet, which feels to me like it's going to lift. But in its casualness, it takes you deeper into where we already were. And once again, the motionlessness of the images that we cut to there's a degree of stylization, but it's also that motionless because it's happening at that time of the day where it is hottest. And it's the people who don't have a job. It's the Black people who have come from the South because of the promise of what the North is. And so they've tried to get their job. They're married to somebody that's trying to get their job. They're waiting to go on that place. But it happens at that point of the day where it is so hot and so unbearable that they are rendered motionless. And so anything that has a heightened quality was very important to me, that it's grounded in specificity, in the specificity of the moment of the time. And right after that, we cut to outside, the street that's outside, and it's the cars the street is the most packed. The sun is beaming down the hardest, the white sun in the white sky. And so it is that point in the day where after that, we've turned a corner. And once we've turned that corner in terms of Levy's emotional rawness and Toledo making it clear, this is how society sees an entire race of people, then every single thing starts to accelerate from that point. So it was creating, I wanted to create what seemed like a relief from what we just witnessed from Levy's intensity, but it ends up casually and subtly intensifying in a surprising way, so that therefore we are hopefully apprehensive but available to what happens next. Yeah. So that was my idea of the crafting of it, and various people said, but it's two speeches back together. I said, but they won't be the same. They're going to be completely different. But it's two speeches. I said, it won't be the same. Trust me. And so and it was and wanting to also just to create a heightened by the sense of the music underneath, so that therefore it is performative, but it is so internal and so subjective that it's not in Ma's number is coming after. This number, hopefully we lean into it. Because that's one of that's one of the things where I wonder whether that technically happens or not. It's one of the things that I think is which is really fascinating to me. When one is in the theater and the theater is having an impact, you lean into the stage.
Yes.
In a movie, because of the scale of the film, when it's having an impact, you lean back. So I wanted to try to play around with the rhythms of that, so that therefore you lean back on Levy's story because of the emotional rawness of it all, and the vulnerability and the staggeringly brilliant performance of it all. Yes. And then for Toledo to pull you in.
Right. But and thematically, that's all absolutely makes sense and great. I just think also in a formal way, the fact that you are heightening things like that, it really does. I keep thinking, it got all confused this year because of COVID and how movies get released and everything. But that streamers, I think Soderbergh was the first one to really fool around with this, that maybe there's a new kind of movie. He makes those experimental movies, for HBO Max, Netflix. And this seemed to me like another example of that the pressure always, that this is, there are certain pressures that cinema brings to stories. There is a certain photorealism that sort of, has its own demands, and the plot and story and all that stuff. And the pleasures of a play and the pleasures of this play also include language, and talk and ideas, right? And the miracle here is that all those things are served. But I think part of how you pull it off, and it just felt to me like you were maybe cracking up a new form almost, is that by heightening in some ways, big ways or little ways, makeup, close-up at the beginning, all of that stuff, you just were giving the audience license to relax into something that if it doesn't feel entirely real, they are comfortable with, because that's going to give them this amazing emotional kind of reward at the end, that I think, and it seemed to me what was also exciting is that with decisions like that, you start to say, maybe you can get past this conversation, this endless conversation of like, oh, but it still felt like a play or something like that. There's no apology for the fact that there are things about it that are like a play. That's its glory. And letting it be this hybrid thing, I thought was really
that's very interesting. Yeah, but to me, it isn't a play because of it isn't a play, and a lot of people have been saying it's a play because it's got dialogue. Exactly. Right. Well, and it's like so does Network.
That's right.
So
and
does I'm bringing up Faye Dunaway. I'm bringing up Faye Dunaway again. Her, those are arias. Those are
exactly.
Instead of blues arias, they're neurotic arias. They're like, instead of blues black arias, a lot of the arias in Network are neurotic white people having a nervous breakdown arias, but they are arias nonetheless. And I love it because it's celebrating the miracle. It's what human beings do. The storytelling equation of human beings. If I am in charge of my language, it's Southern writers are extraordinary. I mean, all kinds of writers, but Southern writers are really, really fascinating me. And being Southern, I'm fascinated by it because there's this equation that exists in Southern writing, which is I may not be in charge of my life, but I'm in charge of my narrative. And I think that's what all these characters are talking about. And I'm in charge of my narrative. Ma, at a point, is feeling insecure about getting older, about where her career is, about Dusty Mae. She's picked up this girl who's with her, who is a blatant, total fluid flirt. So all these things, and her voice is being put into this machine, and she's know they're going to try to screw her. So every single thing about her day is about her losing control. And so when she starts to talk about the blues and her career and Bessie Smith, that's her chance to regain control over her narrative. And it's a human impulse that we all have, so that we are in charge of. And so that's what the language is to me. And so I felt like it was my job, and there's a wonderful monologue where Slow Drag talks about how he got his name from grinding on this woman. There are all these things that are just brilliant, and they're perpetually part of the play. But once again, in my understanding of what I wanted to show, which is the power dynamic between Levy and Ma, if a story didn't activate their journey, then it ended up being cut from the film. And so to me, I don't know how to engage, if it seems like a hybrid, hallelujah. If it seems like a play, which I don't think it is, whoever said that, go to hell. I'm just talking about.
Whoever said what? Hybrid?
No, hybrid. Whoever said it's a play on film.
Oh, right. Oh, no.
They go to hell. But to me, what I took on my responsibility is to find the intimacy. This is what directing is to me in a very simple form. It's locating the intimacy and the urgency in a story, and then crafting a world and a landscape and the characters that embody that intimacy and urgency. And so that's my job on every single project that I do, is to figure out why the character is so invested in these words coming out of their mouth, and why they're so invested in the choices that they are making. And if I can understand that and communicate that to an actor, and then help cajole, push, sub, nurture, support, nurture them to embody that fully, then it's going to create something that's hopefully going to be engaging and captivating, and hopefully have a degree of potency.
Absolutely, yes. And when you talk about the power relationship, the way that you were able to translate that visually, one of my favorite shots is when Ma realizes that it's been a while since she's seen Gussie Mae, and it's gone quiet in here. I don't like quiet, and that sort of off kilter close up, where and she's been looming in so many frames, and now she's not, I thought that was that, when I hear you say the whole thing is a power struggle between the two of them, it just becomes clear that informed, as you say, almost every visual decision, because
and also because one of the things is another thing which Viola and I talked about is the exhaustion of going to war every day. Yes. Because you are an artist, because you are Black, because you are a woman, because you are a Black woman artist, going to war as you know you must, but the physical and spiritual wear and tear of that, and the exhaustion of that. And in the beginning of that speech, she yells something at Sturtevant, and then that moment, it was very interesting, because in editing, in that moment where she says, "And too cheap to buy you a Coke," and she yells at him, and we filmed it in a series of blocks, and then we picked up with her going, "They don't care nothing about me." And in editing, I had in one cut, I had a pause. And too cheap to buy your Coca-Cola. Pause. They don't care nothing about me. And what we ended up with, too cheap to buy your Coca-Cola. They don't care nothing about me. That once he left the room, she could drop her defiance, and the exhaustion of having to be defiant all the time was instantly there. And then to allow her to allow this galvanic figure who we've seen, who takes on a white policeman in 1927, who takes on anybody and anything, to just be rendered fragile and delicate and exhausted, was the complete and total perfect choice for that moment. And it's as is every moment with the lovely Miss Davis, brilliantly embodied. And it was just the wear and tear of it all, the wear and tear of having to be a warrior all the time just to be an artist.
Mm-hmm. I see we're coming close to our end, so let's go to the end. The coda that you added.
Yeah.
The play ends with the with Toledo's death and basically a few moments of people being called. So can you talk about that decision?
Oh, with the band?
Mm.
Yeah, and I was just, it's another one of these things. Ruben was on his way down, coming down to my place. So we were going to talk about it. And this image, and I had just been, I've always been sort of obsessed with Paul Whiteman, the conductor, who at one point had a concert at Carnegie Hall, in which it was the concert that made a lady out of jazz, which is so fucked up and annoying and offensive on so many levels. And so I've always had a little casual obsession with him. But to me, there are two deaths that happen. There's the death of Toledo at the end, and then there's the death of Levy's art. There's the death of Levy's artistry being stolen from him. And we all know the dynamics of, Big Mama Thornton singing "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," and then Elvis Presley. And they're abstract. I mean, we get them. We understand them in a very tangible way. But the thing, which is what I wanted to do, is I wanted, hopefully by the end of the film, we as an audience have fallen in love with Levy and his charm and his brashness and his stupidity and foolishness and arrogance and the tragedy of him, and the tragedy of realizing that regardless of this man's promise, there was the past, which is so scarred within him. There's no way he was going to ever be able to really escape that. So that therefore, when we are feeling all of this emotion, when we then see somebody has taken his song, it's not an abstract idea. It's happened to somebody, hopefully, who we've grown to love and care about and be invested in, and it felt brutal to me, because if something's going to be in the paper next day, this black man killed another black man in the basement of a recording studio on such and such street. It's a small story. It's a very small story. It matters because we have grown to care about them, but it's a throwaway story. It doesn't matter. Whereas the exact same thing that Ma has been fighting about, to ownership of her artistry, we see happen to him, and it just seemed like the sort of perfect completing button to the story, and because it's and next.
Yep.
It's not no. It's not horror. It's just and the next day, or 3 days later, or 5 days later, the beat goes on.
Right.
And then following that, it's very interesting because I did a preview in Atlanta, and shortly after that sequence, a little bit of music started to play, and then the lights came up, and the audience was loving the film. They were loving it, and then they felt brutally betrayed. Brutally betrayed. And in the talk back, this one man said, what's going on in the world? And I come home and I turn on the news. You can't do that. You can't do that to me. It's very interesting because also at that moment, while Ma was riding in the car, I brought back a section of Toledo's speech at that point. Oh, and then I eliminated that because it was attaching an intellectual thought to a moment that we were experiencing viscerally and emotionally, so that therefore it was telling you what to think about, as opposed to you being free to think about what you were thinking about. And then we had the moment with the band. And then that's where the moment came where having those 7 images of Ma Rainey and hearing her voice singing Ma Rainey's Black Bottom came from, because that is the thing that survived.
Survives, right.
That is the thing. It's the Fortinbras moment in the piece. It's a lot, it's like in Hamlet, there's a lot of dead bodies, but Fortinbras tell us we need to go forward. And having Ma's voice coming in at the end and images of her, it is the moment that says, and something survived.
Yeah.
And I would not have discovered that had we not done that preview and that abrupt, brutal ending. So the coda, that ultimately true coda, while the credits are playing, was crucial to not lifting the story out of the emotional state that the film ends in, and that in theory we are in. But it's a slight floating slightly above the moment, just ever so slightly, so that we can gain breath. That was what was involved. And so I view, the stabbing moment, Ma in the car, the band moment, and then Ma Rainey singing as all part of some musical movement, if you will, an emotional movement.
Well, I get a real pang when I hear you talking about Atlanta preview, because I hope when we're done with all this that there are certain keeper movies like this that do get released in theaters, and we do get to. I would love to see this big and with an audience.
It was really beautiful. I mean, there was also this fascinating moment when and watching them watch the opening, where watching the panic that they felt, and then the joy of Ma, and then when the sequence happened, they changed, and then they leaned in to listen, and it's like I gave them permission to not have to worry about listening for at least 3 minutes. So therefore I saved up, and now you better listen, because there's going to be people talking. Right. Saved up to there. But the moment, it was really fascinating to me, the moment where Sturtevant says to Levy, "Here, let me take that music." The entire audience screamed out, "No!"
Oof. Right.
It was, that Levy could have heard them, but he couldn't. They screamed out, "No!" It was so, and the same thing when he attacked Toledo, that exact same thing. And it was startling how they reacted, but it was also a source of incredible pride, because they had taken ownership of these characters.
Yep.
Which is a great thing.
Wow. Well, thank you. It's an extraordinary accomplishment. I think I speak for everyone in our guild when I say that it's just inspiring to hear you talk.
Thank you.
And it just, again, thanks for the movie, and thanks for doing this.
And well, thank you. Thank you this has been fun. Been fun.
Good.
Good. Stay safe and not too cold.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more, The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Stay tuned in the coming weeks as we bring you discussions of films from Paul Greengrass, Andrew Heckler, and Ramin Barani. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find this show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.